Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. It's free practice day of the Hungarian Grand Prix. Lots of drama from start to finish. Not just some crazy Red Bull upgrades they've brought to their car that are going to alternate between the slower speed circuits and the higher speed circuits, but also what's going on Mercedes. These massive Windows outages, the Crowdstrike outages, of course, an organisation that sponsors Mercedes. So simultaneously Mercedes have to be there and say, oh, no problems here, while having serious problems with their equipment during the first practice session. Not ideal at all when it comes down to the data and actually setting up their car properly for the weekend. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Sorry for no video yesterday. Very busy here in Dallas right now with all the stuff we're trying to figure out for the event I'm here for, but we've got to talk about some Formula 1 today because MoneyGram Haas F1 team confirmed that Kevin Magnussen yesterday is not going to return to their team. It's been pretty much known for some point. Behrman's coming in, Ocon's probably coming in as well, and therefore there's no room for Magnussen. So more than likely this is probably it for his Formula 1 career. Last year was not great. I mean, he of course got that incredible pole back in 2022 at the Brazilian Grand Prix. Apart from that, it's not been a great return really to form for Magnussen since he came back in, of course, for Nikita Mazepin when all that happened at the start of 2022. And I think generally it's probably about time that he's out of the sport and somebody else is going to be coming in. I still think there's potentially a great career ahead of him elsewhere, maybe over in the States, you know, IndyCar or something I think should be appealing for Magnussen given, you know, what the likes of Marcus Ericsson has done over there and stuff like this. But yeah, I wonder what will happen now because he's out of a seat. He's probably not going to get another Formula 1 drive. So is he just going to go balls to the wall and not care anymore about anything and just, you know, put it all on the table, shall we say, as he's been a pretty aggressive and controversial driver even so far this season. There was also talk about Williams and exactly what's going on with the Ocon situation. There were interesting rumours a couple of days ago that Alpine were actually, at least it was a conversation, that Ocon could potentially go to Williams mid-season, right? And they get rid of him now, and they put him straight into the Williams. But that is no longer going to be happening, apparently because Alpine don't want to help one of their rivals, which is pretty embarrassing for Alpine that they're like, yeah, Williams are a bit of a rival right now, a bit of a scary rival. Shouldn't really be that way, given where Williams have been for the last few years and the fact that Alpine are a customer outfit, but they've decided not to do that, and as a result, it seems like this Ocon to Haas thing is basically going to be a thing, and therefore opening the door a little bit more to Valtteri Bottas possibly. A Bottas-Albon partnership at Williams I think would be kind of nice, but of course that somewhat depends on where Sainz ends up, and that is still such a massive question right now in Formula 1, right? There's just so much still happening in the driver market that it's almost absurd, and we're still not really any closer to getting answers on this stuff. Yuki Tsunoda, however, was giving comment on the possibility of getting promoted to the main Red Bull team and says it would be weird to promote Liam Lawson instead. Sure, Liam did a good job when he drove for the team, but I think I did more than that. We'll see how it goes. In the end, they know how to manage the drivers. I don't think Yuki's wrong. It just feels to me that for whatever reason, Christian Horner doesn't seem to think that Yuki's the man to do the job, and maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong, I don't know. But if they are going to get rid of Sergio Perez for somebody, Tsunoda is by far the most obvious choice, given that they've selected him as like, yeah, he's their best driver at the RB team, better than Ricciardo, because otherwise they wouldn't have re-signed him over Danny Rick as they did, and Danny Rick's situation is still kind of up in the air. Lawson was good, but, you know, possibly not quite Tsunoda levels. Maybe there's upside in the future, and Yuki also goes on to say, I feel like I'm ready to fight against the top teams, higher positions, and even against Max. Now, will Horner want to hear that he's ready to fight against Max? Maybe not, just because the idea might be at Red Bull, you know, have fun racing Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, but, you know, maybe don't make it too interesting against your own teammates because maybe not in the best interest of whatever. In the end, they, Red Bull, are the ones that they're going to decide these are the things that I can't control. Some discussion on Lawson as well, because there were some rumours how good his race pace actually was, or his qualifying pace, when they were doing the runs of testing back at Silverstone shortly after everything happened at the Silverstone Grand Prix this year. Apparently his pace was within the window. There's been some discussion. Was he outside of what they expected? Was he in the right ballpark? He's within a couple of tenths of Max, or they call it a few tenths, which is Checo's gap, where he scored podiums. But of course, the car isn't quite as competitive now as it was back then. So, yeah, the feeling tends to be that Lawson, in terms of pace, maybe wouldn't be that dissimilar to Perez. But then again, maybe there's more upside, and there's also maybe a feeling that his confidence and his demeanour would mean that he wouldn't you know, have these like explosions or implosions that maybe happen to Gasly and Albon. So there's something to be said for that. And of course, a driver who can improve over time. And there are further rumors today that, yeah, Yuki Tsunoda is not going to be going to Red Bull. Like, he's not being really considered, which isn't a surprise, but it's just like, well, it should be a surprise, but it's not, because we know how Red Bull go. And the crazy thing is that Lawson is actually more likely to be given the nod. So definitely interesting that Yuki makes the comments, yeah, it'd be pretty weird to promote that guy. And apparently that's what they are potentially considering doing. The other funny thing was this from Sergio himself, who was kind of asked about, you know, what's going to happen over the next couple of rounds. Is the pressure on? And he says, I don't understand why there was so much talk about me and my future. Nothing is going to change these 2 weekends, even if I win the race or if I finish last. I have a contract with the team and I am going to fulfill it. So, yeah, I don't know. Does he know something we don't, or do we know something that he doesn't? Because it seems to me that, sure, you can say this publicly, but I mean, Helmut Marko, like, a Red Bull have made it quite clear. Like, clearly the word internally at Red Bull has turned on Perez to some degree, and even the public conversations are absolutely not at all an absolutely resounding endorsement of Perez. It's arguably quite the opposite right now. But let's talk about some upgrades. This Red Bull stuff is very fascinating, actually, especially because we just talked about the other day, the fact that some of the cooling solutions on the car, Newey was apparently not very happy about, but was overruled by their technical team to potentially not great effect. Issues for Ferrari, in that the fact that they have used lots of their development budget already. You know, they've used over 50%, which, to be fair, we're halfway through the season. Maybe that makes about, you know, a decent amount of sense. But, you know, they can't afford any more mistakes with upgrades. That is certainly true. But today was a pretty good day for them, really, with the changes they made to their car. And there's some optimism that they may well be back in business this weekend, Ferrari. So potentially setting up for another very interesting weekend. This, however, is the new Red Bull. And it's a dramatically different cooling packaging, just packaging in general, the bodywork at the rear of the car. First of all, kind of incredible that Red Bull are able to do this, able to just change these elements as they like, and both bodywork ideas can work, right? When they've got those high shoulders and, you know, the Mercedes W14-esque ones that they're running on their car right now. This, however, is the newer version, which is only on Max's car this weekend. And it's very interesting because there was discussions about the side pods and the fact that Newey doesn't like some of that stuff, and the best F1 designer in Newey didn't agree on those kind of rear guns, right? The Mercedes W14-esque ones and some of the strong cooling extremes. So, is it possible now that they're listening to Newey a bit more with this latest upgrade? And it's quite clear that this is a substantial upgrade. But the talk is, this will only be used this version, right? I mean, you can see how different the bodywork is. I mean, it's night and day, really. The channels on the left, the channels on the top of the car. I can't imagine this was cheap to, you know, design and to produce, really, for Red Bull. So, you know, this is a very important upgrade that, frankly, needs to work. Because if it doesn't, then they're going to be set back a long way. But this is the top version, the newer version. This is the one at the bottom here with these older kind of designs. And apparently they will be bringing this back. It's not the last we're going to see of those high rear guns or whatever you want to call them on the car. Apparently they like that for the higher speed circuits that are lower downforce, right? So for something like Spa, which is coming up next week, they're probably going to revert and run the older version. You know, Monza, like Baku, stuff like this. They're probably going to run the older version. But for the higher downforce tracks and some of the slower speed stuff, they believe this newer version is going to work better. But basically everything has changed in some regard. I mean, you know, it looks like a different car. Like, it genuinely looks like we're comparing two different entire year of car specs here, just how dramatically different the upper side of the bodywork is. So it's one of those upgrades that they need to work, Red Bull, and you know, early speculation is that, yeah, like, it has kind of worked. The other point is that Max is running the new version, Checo's running the older version here, right? So again, they only have one version of this ready for the weekend, and of course, obviously, it's going to be Max that gets it rather than Perez, but you know, pretty much everything here looks different from this angle, and yeah, so as I mentioned, actually, yeah, Spa, Monza, Baku, they're going to use this old Silverstone package, which they've got with Checo now, but for Zandvoort, Hungary, Singapore, stuff like this, they're going to use the newer aero design. So do the team know what they're talking about? Is this actually going to work? I mean, you know, it's got to be said, some of the changes they made over the last few months have not exactly had the desired result. So time will tell on this one. But as Max says, this is a pretty big package, right? And, you know, says it's a very important weekend for everyone, and goes on to say that if this doesn't work as intended, then then it's a big problem, and I don't know how the season's going to go, he says, because, you know, they've put kind of all of their eggs in the basket of this upgrade working for some of these circuits, and like even with the older version, they're still going to be competitive enough to win the championship, but certainly in Max's hands for the drivers. But it's definitely a problem if this doesn't work. But early indications is that it maybe has done. The big problem, though, of the day came from Mercedes, and this was kind of incredible, really. If you guys work in corporate or whatever, right, overnight you'll have seen one of the biggest outages in the history of the internet, possibly, with loads of Windows issues, loads of blue screening issues. You know, we had airlines grounded, we had banks having issues. There's all sorts of stuff and kind of fallout from this still going on to the present day. But the question was it going to affect events such as this? The answer, of course, is yes. Now, especially, the funny thing is, for a team like Mercedes, a CrowdStrike, who are, you know, a big organization behind all of this happening. And not only are they a partner of Mercedes, but, you know, they're a pretty major sponsor of Mercedes, right? I mean, here they are on the halo and on George Russell's helmet. So, you know, Mercedes is trying to ensure that there weren't any kind of fallouts from this. The problem is there were, and there's some incredible images of this, really, because Mercedes suffering with these blue screening problems as a result of using Windows and therefore CrowdStrike on their setups. Now, I imagine other organizations might not be using, certainly not CrowdStrike, but, you know, maybe they're using Windows, maybe they're using Linux or something, right, an alternate operating system so that, you know, these issues are far less likely. And there is some debate as to whether you should do this. But however, you know, you've got partners. I mean, it's a great shot, isn't it, really, of the PCs being problematic and they've got CrowdStrike on the back of their kind of team t-shirts or polo shirts, and what an image that is. So Mercedes obviously have to say, oh, you know, we're working with our partners at CrowdStrike to mitigate the impact, kind of saying like, oh, they're helping us resolve the problem rather than actually they kind of cause the problem, and here we are having trouble. And, you know, this was just before the first practice session of the day that, you know, this image is going around of the blue screens, you know, the sad face, and, you know, I'm sure you guys have seen images of this all around the world. This was another one as well where, you know, they're trying to get their PCs back up and running, but they're all having issues, and they're working really hard here in Hungary to try and get this to work just about on time, or to get the PCs back up and running, because, you know, they need all this stuff to work for the data, right? I mean, sure, the car can turn on, like the car's going to turn on and be able to drive, great, but that's not what it's all about, right? Like, you need all the telemetry, you need all the data, you need to be able to see what the other teams are doing, you need to understand whether the feedback from the drivers aligns with exactly what you're seeing in the data in terms of performance in certain corners, in terms of ride height data, what sort of downforce is being generated, what are the sensors on the brakes say in certain situations, all this type of stuff, all this information you need it to be analysed. And if half of your PCs aren't working as the first practice session starts, it's far from ideal. So I believe they were able to reboot and get most of these, if not all of these PCs, back up and running just in time, but it certainly didn't help their preparation, right? Even if it didn't absolutely affect the outcome of the sessions on the day, it's likely that it has had at least some impact on Mercedes' performance on the weekends. So pretty incredible in a way, right, how, you know, having this CrowdStrike sponsorship has in some regards potentially held them back in some way, but you know, it's also interesting that they, of course, go into free practice 1 as a result of this and do not have a very good session at all, which is, well, at least in terms of their overall performance numbers, and we can see that in both regards. We'll see here in a second. Now, this is kind of interesting as well, that the onboard cameras weren't even working because of this Windows crash, so lots of problems that were going around today, but free practice 1 eventually does get underway. I'm not going to be able to cover FP2 today because just so busy with stuff we've got to do. Got to get this video out right about now, but yeah, the session gets underway. We've got some flow viz going on, so many upgrades. I think basically every team brought some sort of upgrade apart from McLaren, which is quite interesting because McLaren brought a lot of upgrades over the last few rounds, but not so much more recently than that. So at the end of FP1, the Mercedes, not exactly a great session. Now, they didn't do that many quali laps. It was mostly long run pace related, but given it was the car that has done well in Hungary historically and has won the last couple of Grand Prix in a row in Austria and then in Silverstone, not exactly a great session. Hamilton was P10, Russell was P4, and in terms of long run data, Leclerc was looking very good on the hard. McLaren on the medium were consistent 25 lows, says Denny, and Hamilton was more averaging, you know, 25 mids, something like that in terms of his long run pace. So there's definitely something to say about, especially Ferrari actually, because Carlos Sainz tops the session with a time about 0.3 of a second ahead of Verstappen. Apparently, though, the majority of that time was lost for Max in the final corner, so they are pretty confident, Red Bull. Their car's working quite well in the hands of Max, at least with the new upgrades. But whether it's going to be enough, that's another question. But Max is then sandwiched by both Ferrari, Sainz and Leclerc. And there was a general feeling that, yeah, the Ferrari with the upgrades are looking good here again. They needed it to. Absolutely, they needed it to. But so far, at least in FP1, it's looking good. And the long-run data says the same thing, that in terms of, pure pace, the Ferrari is right now possibly the team to beat. Of course, as Max is going to be there, I'm sure Mercedes are probably not going to be too far away either, but also not the greatest run for McLaren. Nice little glory run here for Zhou into P5 with a 1:19.1, so impressive from him, but it's not exactly super clear cut as to where the performance currently is for all of these respective teams. But still, the Ferrari return to the top of the timesheet was not something that maybe I was completely expecting this weekend. Quickly on Aston Martin, though, because they bought a few upgrades and it's been an absolute, unmitigated disaster. Alonso was in the car going 0.4 of a second slower than his teammate, and then it was yeah, you want to give Lance the upgrades as well to see how it goes. And Fernando was asked the question, hey, what about balance? What do you think we should say to Lance about getting the balance sorted for his car? And he just said, good luck, son, because it ain't working. So, yeah, Aston Martin continued to really struggle to understand what the hell is going on with their car, and there are going to be some serious questions raised if they can't figure it out from now to the end of the weekend. Helmut Marko, though, does say the upgrades did seem to work on the Red Bull, but Ferrari has a resurgence. That's down to the track as well. We've got to refine some things, and there's a feeling that there's basically a lot of time lost in a single corner, the last one before coming up the straight, purely to do with behaviour of the car, something we normally don't have. Oval, we're happy, and it's only the first practice session, so I'm sure there's some dialing in they've got to do with the upgrades, but there was a feeling that Red Bull have kind of maybe got this one right, but we've thought that before, and then the rest of the weekend hasn't exactly gone as we might have expected it to. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. As always, hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.